and welcome to Novel Ideas. This is a podcast where we talk with political pros about writing a new playbook for Democratic media. We're talking with our industry's best and brightest to amplify the new strategies that we need to win because we know we can't win the future with the same old playbooks of the past. I'm your host. I'm Rachel Campbell. I am an almost 20-year industry vet of politics and digital media, and I'm CEO at Novel Messaging. I love talking with smart people and turning hot takes into action. So here we go. Today, we're super lucky to be joined by our guest, Cayana Mackey-Nance, who currently is working as Vice President of Brand and Social for state newsrooms at Courier, one of the fastest growing local news networks in the country. But I know Cayana from her previous work with the DNC, where she led the first ever credentialed creator cohort at the Democratic National Convention in 2024, where she was the chief architect of a program that empowered over 200 content creators to come to the convention and amplify the messages from the convention, amplify underrepresented communities and voices, and reshaped what political engagement looks like at conventions. She has a background in scaling and leading digital programs for political campaigns, advocacy organizations, and progressive causes, and has a lot of expertise in connecting with and mobilizing diverse audiences through authentic, impactful storytelling. We're so pumped to have you. Thanks for being here, Kiana.
Thank you, Rachel. It's so great being here.
I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us. You and I have had the pleasure to work together a little bit, and I know a little bit about your story. But for the folks who are listening, tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of how you come to this work, and maybe why you're a Democrat.
Right. So, fun fact, I grew up in a Republican household.
Yeah,
It
happens to
is
the best of us.
yeah, right. And it's so funny because my parents are Caribbean immigrants and, most of our honestly, most of their political background is based in faith. It's based in their conservatism and, Republicans do a really great job of tying those together. So, my whole background has been raised by Republican parents, and I think that really shaped how I'm not a Republican and how I look at things in a way where I can see their perspective. So even thinking about where we're at right now in Democratic politics, I understand why Republicans think that way because I'm hearing these Fox News messages. I'm hearing OAN, and it's a wild world to come out of. But just going back to that, I grew up in the South. I'm born and raised in Tennessee, so from Chattanooga, Tennessee. My parents still live there. They came over in college from my dad's from the Bahamas, my mom's from St. Lucia. Met in the Caribbean Students Association and stayed in their college town. So, I think growing up as a first generation American in the South was a really interesting perspective, having my parents who were such strong backgrounds and coming from the islands and having that immigrant perspective. And then growing up in the South, growing up in predominantly white education spaces and, just having them to understand little things like, we have, proms, and this is what we do. We get dressed up and go to these things. Why would you need an expensive dress? And just little things like that that I felt like I was constantly helping them understand of how to be an American. But, it's really great though because I still have so much culture from them and my whole family being from the Caribbean. But, grew up in the South. I then went to, Baylor University in Texas, so, more conservatism just kept going
You
back.
can't escape it. It keeps
You
drawing
really
you in.
can't, you really can't.
Yeah.
And studied public relations. I ended up transferring to another school in Tennessee to graduate, so I graduated from Lee University. Um, People who know what Lee is, it's another conservative university, so let's just say I have a very interesting background. And, I think what really brought me into this space, honestly, um, was just all the turmoil that was happening in police brutality. I had moved to Atlanta at this time. It was 2016, and, our whole world was different, and things were just looking so different than my, I guess, sheltered background growing up in the South is just seeing like the realities of our communities and just how everyone's getting torn apart by police brutality, by, just feeling that intense social pressure of the shifts in and, it's not just, political, it was just the community pressures that, just all the people who were really trying to fight for these causes, and I just felt like, "What am I doing?" I felt so passive watching, protests happening and just watching all the turmoil and feeling like I was just, in my young 20s just trying to think about, "Where am I going out? What am I doing with my friends?" And just it just woke me up to realize I have to be a part of this. I can't just sit back and watch so much happening. And so I actually just got into community organizing. That was really what started it. Was just looking at our local community in Atlanta and working with nonprofits and organizations there to really build up on that side. And actually, I launched my own event planning business where I was working with local nonprofits and we would plan events to get more millennials at the time. We're the hot generation. So
We used to be it. Now we're old news.
we're still hot. Okay. That's my hot take. Millennials are still
We still got it.
And so, I just was trying to really expose them to other organizations doing community work. So it was called Party Because we threw events to get millennials to come and learn about orgs. And, that was really my passion at the time was just how am I getting communities together? How am I bringing people together in these spaces? And while my full-time job was always working in marketing and, digital media, I just loved being able to really cultivate these spaces where people were exposed to orgs and causes that they'd never, heard of and could really connect with them.
I love
So
this. I didn't know this about your story, and it's like having worked with you at convention, which was all about cultivating a physical space for this online engagement, it's all coming together. It makes so much sense, like, how you were so smart about how to put that together. It's also so fascinating, you know, it sounds like you could have been a lot of different kinds of people, but the fact that you're a Democrat is maybe a little unique, so you must be really committed.
Honestly, that's the wildest part is just, you would think of my background and think, "Oh, she's probably a moderate or, just someone who's not that plugged in." But honestly, I think that community work, really exposed me to more than just, giving volunteer service work, but really like on the ground movement building and what does it look like to organize from within. And then 2016 elections rolled around.
Sure did.
Whew.
And
I
a
know,
lot
I know
changed
you were
for
on
all of
that.
us. Yeah, yeah, what a time. Well, so I wanna hear more about your story, and I also wanna hear about, we kind of always talk about a frame, but I'm already eager to ask about this because so much of what I'm hearing about your story pulls together digital work with, like, offline community building and a focus on, you know, place and community, at a local level, and I know that's, like, something I'm eager to talk to you about, but give us a quick sense about, like, 2016 hit, and we know where you are now. How'd you get from there to here?
Yeah, it's wild. I was at an election night party in Atlanta.
No kidding!
And yeah, I was at an election night party in Atlanta. And I was there with one of my best friends who also ironically is now a political creator. But we were there at the party and the energy at the beginning, everyone's excited. We're like, we got this in the bag. Hillary's about to be president. And just seeing how people started to leave the room and just the energy dropping, and I'll never forget, I was just like, "I don't know if I should leave, I don't know if I should stay," and we were like, "We can't stay here all night, like, we may not get the results," and I was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna go home, go to bed, and everything will be fine when I wake up." And then to wake up and see, as soon as I pick up my phone, that Donald Trump is president, and then turn on the TV, and it just honestly, it was awakening because I was like, "What did I do?" I'm working in the community, but what did I do for elections. All this work that we're doing is so powerful, but if we have the wrong people in office, at the time I was just like, if we're not electing the right people, how is change going to happen? How all this work that we're doing is going to be stripped away if we don't have the right people elected. So then I started looking into local politics and volunteered for a mayor's race we had at the time in Atlanta. And then after that, Stacey Abrams won the primary. And I was like, okay, I am not going to be on the, the sidelines again. What can I do? What happens on campaigns? Literally knew nothing other than volunteering. Went to her website and she had a field organizer position, and I signed up to be a field organizer, having no idea what they do, what it was. Somehow, within a 3-day window, I'm starting a new job, I'm quitting my current job and joining the campaign and being a field organizer, in Atlanta, and that was one of the wildest experiences, but honestly, that's what lit the fire, where I was like, "I gotta keep going." Like, when we lost, I was like, "This is not the end. We have to keep going. I have to, keep working on getting Georgia blue and making sure that right people get elected," and that turned into my path of campaigning and just hopping from race to race, got to go to Jersey, work on the Corey presidential, before coming back to be on the Warnock campaign. And honestly, that win is really what just really made me realize like this is what happens when we invest locally. We had the infrastructure from 2018. We all worked together to really bring it home, and then starting from the general when people rarely knew who, Reverend Warnock was at the time to he becoming this him becoming a household name, and, it showed me that, it's on the groundwork, but it's also online tactics, and just how we were able to take the Vote Warnock messaging to a national movement, it just really, really drove that all together.
It's so it's such a story that I think so many people who are likely to listen to this will relate to because I think we can all still feel, or at least I can still feel it in my body what it felt like on election night 2016, and that next morning. So, and that being sort of a radicalizing or transformative experience for a lot of people that pulled people into the movement. So I'm so glad you shared that. I didn't know that about you. And I think a lot of people will feel inspired and feel connection to that story. I know I do. Okay. It again, I'm like already jumping in right into it because it all connects so much to like what I see you working on now. So let's get into it. So
Yeah.
we like to talk with folks. There's a lot of different things that Democrats could be doing better or that we're not doing well right now. And we could go a lot of different directions, but we like to ask folks what's sort of one thing that you're focused on right now? What's one thing that's a problem that you're worried about that our party's kind of missing or getting wrong right now?
Yeah, honestly, it's what are we doing in the States? The ones that are not just, a part of the battleground list, but what are those states that are they could be a battleground. They're a battleground for people that live there, and just knowing organizers who are in, very red states like Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, who are fighting every day just to have their voices heard and to keep their community to even continue to vote, continue to be engaged in anything. But they're not a priority. I think that just thinking about how we're building these movements in states like this and the power of social media, the power of being online. It's just that's how those messages are carrying. And I think about my time working in Florida as a digital director for Val Deming's race. And we knew Florida is a hard state, people told me before joining that campaign, "Florida is very difficult. Are you sure you wanna do this?" But, so many youth movements came out of Florida, March for Our Lives, We Say Gay, like, all of these powerful movements for students, and they were organizing online, and just seeing the movements they were able to build in this state that most people at a high, you know, level of what's going to win this year will not be thinking of. Florida's not always on the map. These students are organizing and they were doing it all online. They were doing it in on WhatsApp groups. They're doing it over TikTok at the time before TikTok is now banned. It is banned on campuses in Florida. And at the time, like this was their way to talk to each other and hear about what's happening on the ground and to know how to organize, where to show up to rally, where to protest, and just how they were able to use digital as such a strong tool before this we even built this campaign showed that, there are people here who are ready for change, and just giving them those tools is the way that we're going to continue to build movements. And so I think one thing that I was really proud of what we did in Florida, even though we didn't win, was we really looked at TikTok as a vehicle to organize youth movements and to get people to really understand who Val Demings was as a candidate, and to tell her story in a unique way that we were not going to see on the news. We weren't going to see in our paid media. This was a personal look at her life, her relating to her granddaughter. And, I think the magic that happened in Florida is what I'd love to see Democrats invest in nationwide. I know that's a big topic to say across the nation. We have battleground states, we have priority states, we have the word that I hate, viable races that we need to. Well, what is
Viable.
viable?
Yeah. Yeah.
How is it viable?
Yeah, they're gonna
So
run either way. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, it's also so interesting because, well, one, um, what I hear you saying is movements are happening every day in small communities and statewide and all over the place. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of times I think as a party, we think we're going to like cook up an idea for a movement in DC and then like take it to the people. And we're not like paying attention to where movements are already taking hold. And like it's a I think we still get trapped into sort of like a it's not even top down, it's like DC out. It's like the approach. Um, and it doesn't work as well as, looking at what's already happening and then working with it and working alongside it and in partnership with the folks doing the organizing. So that's like piece 1, but piece 2 in it is and I'm so curious for your thoughts on this. We both work in, like, this weird bucket that gets labeled digital, but we all know, like, digital involves a lot of very different things for different tactics, for different purposes and different goals and different strategies. And a lot of what I hear you talking about too is people think about social media primarily as a place for, like, making content for message distribution, but it's, maybe better viewed, especially in today's media landscape, as a tool for organizing. Like, how do we meet people where they are and engage in conversation with people about what matters to them and move them up a ladder of engagement towards action. Like that's what organizing is and that's what good social media is. I'm just curious for your take on that.
yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think that as Dems, we do one well or the other well, and we're still trying to crack the code of how do you do it both well. And, I think the magic we saw with Obama's, and I know you were on the campaign, so
I
magic that,
wasn't. No, I
you
wasn't.
were, oh, I'm sorry.
I've only ever worked with the people who were, but I personally was like running a small state senate race in 2012 and I was a college intern knocking doors in the panhandle of Oklahoma in 2008. So I never actually played a formal role, but I think I'm flattered.
Well, you understand their organizing techniques, they found people in state who, were already in those communities to continue building and having that, neighborhood captain mentality where these are people in these communities that can really launch, honestly, that was the last time a Dem won statewide in Florida. And then which is it's actually kind of sad to say out loud, but it's real,
Mhm.
it's just I think that those tactics of having the in-person organizing, but then thinking about we're now in 2025, which we're all online. So how are we putting those 2 together so that we have the strong, authentic neighborhood model organizing, but it's scaled through online? And the way that we connect with each other. And I think there was so much progress that happened working with creators and just the ways that people really, engage them on the ground in these states, but I still feel like we have so much more to learn and grow in that space. And how are their online communities, how can they be looked at as almost neighborhood captains? Like, I think that's something that I haven't I haven't figured out yet, so don't I'm not saying I have this strategy, but I feel like so many people are cracking the surface of what does that look like to have that mindset, but scale it online.
Yeah, I think that's I guess none of us have it figured out clearly because 'cause we're not doing it well as a movement yet, but this is, I think, the most like, productive way in is to like, exactly what you're saying, like, thinking about these creators and personalities as, captains for a community that they represent, and, like, their audience is the community, and then how do we bring an organizer lens to how we engage with that captain, right? Yeah, so, I'm really eager to hear more about, how you're trying new things and implementing and taking some of this approach, into your work. So we've sort of been talking about this problem of, not having enough investment, or like a strategic approach in states and sort of being a little bit more mindful of like that bottom up way of thinking about the work. That if we're just sort of defining that as the problem that Democrats are, like, out of whack on right now, talk to us about your novel solution, or it's okay if you don't have, the solution entirely figured out, but, like, what are the things that you're working on that you're excited about that are, like, pushing this forward or helping to crack the code?
Yeah. Honestly, the work we're doing right now at Career with local media, I think that's something that we tend to forget, as you said, they're DC out. And I did my time in DC year and a half. So I was part of that bubble for a little while too.
Braver than me. I haven't. I've avoided it successfully so far. Maybe that's why I am the way I am anyway.
Hey, I mean, but for real, that's what it is. It's a bubble. We get so stuck in like practice and theories and best tactics and viable races that won. But every state is so different, and I think that's one thing I've learned so much at Career is just having a social media strategy that works nationwide does not exist. Having an organic growth strategy nationwide does not exist because every state is so different and unique and they have their own interests, their own trending topics. And so, what I've learned already working here, and I started in September, so it's still new to career, is just what what works in one state may not work in another state, but that doesn't mean it's wrong, it's just uniquely them, and that's why local news, local media matters so much because what is trending in one state means that's what matters to the people there. In the same way that voting, we're making, plans for people to get elected in this state. Who are you gonna talk to? You're gonna talk to the local organizers, you're gonna get the pastors at the churches involved, you're gonna get the nonprofits, you're gonna get the local colleges and things like that. And I think when we think of social media and media, we always think of a national ecosystem instead of pulling down to the basics of there are specific trending topics in this state. There are specific creators or specific media entities that exist here. How are they getting elevated? How are those voices being heard? And, what social media strategies work for them, and I think that really does make a difference in how you're able to have more tailored communication, how you're really having those authentic, trusted messengers on social is they're talking to their people, they're talking to their people in a way that makes sense for them.
I'm curious, do you get to still do any work with creators?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a creator program in our states, so that's been really great just getting to see how we are relating to the creator. So, we're learning best practices, what's working on our social platforms, how are we able to share it with the creators there, as well, and looking at what we did last cycle, and just having those on the ground creators making content that we were sharing on our platforms as well and on our profiles. We were able to elevate their work, and they're elevating our brand as well. So I would say right now I'm really focused on the social strategy side. So not as much direct creator work as I did last cycle, and we did in the trenches at convention. But I think at this point, it's so intertwined,
Yeah,
creators are social media. So,
totally.
um, just excited to see how it keeps going.
Yeah. And, any tips on, like, folks who are maybe trying to run social programs and want to be more local? Like, are any, like, tactical advice on how to, like, tap into the narratives happening in your community? Do you guys have any approaches to, like, social listening or, how are you sort of finding these themes?
Right. Yeah, social listening is huge. I think that that's one thing that, you know, before when I've worked on campaigns, we don't always have enough time to do things like this. And working at organizations that have to build infrastructures for years, you're able to really invest in tools like that. So social listening is huge. Just honestly, even just looking at creator insights on TikTok in your state, you're going to find out more through that than, just looking around in other tools is what are people talking about in your niche, but do it statewide too. So thinking of how we're using creator insights to find that information as well. I would also say just uh, looking at, the headlines. I think that's another thing people tend to miss when they're thinking about creators is that there's still trending topics in your states. There's media headlines that we can pull from to really guide what we're talking about. And then the algorithm, it teaches us so much, like right now, my algorithm is always showing things to do in Chicago because I'm still in Chicago to the convention. But when I move, I'm obviously going to want to learn more about where I'm moving and get those type of activities showing on my feed. So the more that I'm searching what's happening in that state, the more I'm going to see that on my algorithm. And, that's how you're really able to learn what are people talking about? What do people care about right here where I am?
Yeah, I think it's funny because, I am a big believer in social listening and have been, pushing more folks in our party to use those tools for a long time, but you don't actually always even need a fancy tool or subscription, like, just some smart searching on the platform, tapping into, like, relevant hashtags and pulling up what people are talking about gives you something to start from, which is a heck of a lot better than shooting in the dark. Um, yeah, so the platforms, like, give us so much data to work with. Cool. That is really it's really smart to it's almost something that, like, every digital director or comms director on a race in any state, like, how are you regularly checking the feeds and seeing what people are talking about? I mean, it feels like a built-in focus group that we can tap
Right.
into at all times, like, you'd think we'd do it more. Cool. So, I really love this. Is there anything else you think about in terms of how content meets organizing? Like, another thing I'm curious for your take on as somebody who's managing a lot of big social programs. I think another place we overlook is community moderation and responses from the community on our content. Like, often the community will tell you what they like or not like. How do you guys think about that as you're building programs in states? Like, what role does commenting play in how you shape your strategy?
Right. Man, I would say, I think the biggest thing is managing social programs that I've seen is the social manager freaking out when they'll see negative comments, right? Just thinking about campaigns, anything is just always having to get them to understand that negative comments does not mean that you need to delete them, you need to take away, like do not feel like you have to do it. Now there's definitely a line between threatening, harmful language and anything that could be escalated as, safety concerns that those are things we escalate, work with platforms, things like that, especially when you're on candidate races. You just have to always have that in mind. Um, but I would say that, you want people to be talking about whether it's negative or positive, you want them to be talking
Yeah.
about your content. When I worked at Emily's List, that was a big learning curve for our social team is they're like, "We're getting all these comments, some of them are negative." It's just like, guess what? Remember when we weren't getting comments? Like, this means that people are talking. They're talking about you're starting a conversation. But I think the bigger thing, and I'm actually learning so much right now from LinkedIn. I feel like LinkedIn is my new platform.
Yes.
Um, it's such a wealth of information and just people talking about what's working and not working. But I think one thing that we miss so often is commenting to comments and just all of these large brands that are now going viral for a comment that they're making on someone else's post, you know?
Totally, totally. It's a
It's
brand
like we
voice that
don't do it.
we can
Right.
we can and people don't realize, like, when you work, especially on a candidate campaign, you are often publishing as the voice of the candidate, and I think this is, like, a totally under-resourced, like, you could literally weigh in, and that's why it doesn't get done more because, you know, you don't wanna say something in the voice of the candidate. There's always a different level of approvals and risk tolerance with that, but I feel like it could be really used well. I wanna go to, something else you said earlier about a lot of times on campaigns or even in political organizations like Emily's List or you've worked in a lot of different spaces across our party. So you've seen a lot of different levels of resourcing of staff and teams. But one theme that's already come up in our first couple conversations is how under-resourced a lot of these teams really are for the scale of the work that they're trying to do. I'm just curious what your take is as somebody who's seen teams of a variety of sizes, like, and I also don't know that people fully appreciate because there's so much commenting, because there's so much platform data, because there's so much other conversation that we have to monitor, and because there's so much that goes into content publishing, these are not jobs that are like easily done by one junior staffer, but so and you're now at an organization that's resourcing this really well. So talk to us about what this should look like from a staff perspective.
Right, and I feel like as as political staff, we always tend to lean on the junior staffers that have to wear many, many hats. I've been that staffer, I've led those staffers, and it's a lot. I feel like that's honestly what makes political staffers the best hires because you have to learn everything, and leading digital, you have to learn everything. Leading social when you're in these small funding programs, you have to learn every aspect. And then when you get to larger brands, you have more people working on the same thing. You have editorial lenses, you have people that, can look at the strategy and the numbers, and then those that are more focused on actually publishing. But I would say, like, when we don't always have those resources, because that is the reality. A lot of times you just won't have the resource to build out a full social team. I think the biggest thing is leaning in on tools. Like when I've had small budgets and small teams is what sort of tools can we use to really get that same sense of strategy and organization, whether it's strong publishing tools and making sure we have one that fits our actual needs. There's so many, obviously, the big ones that most people know of Sprout Social and Hootsuite, and now more coming as Buffer that have so many tools and now including AI tools on it that, really make it feel like you have a large social infrastructure, right? So starting from that is just thinking of what tools can we use to build up our team. And then when you do have the resources to hire large teams, thinking of presidential campaigns and governor campaigns where the budgets are just so much larger, where you can hire full teams too. It's always having obviously a lead that can drive the overall strategy. We use the term digital director so loosely. Like, what does that actually mean? And for some teams I've been on, digital was literally anything that was online. And then other teams, it was more segmented into, traditional digital where it was just, social, any sort of video or creative and website. And then others where it really was just social, like the digital director was just a content director. But for my take, the best teams have two focuses. You have someone who is content driven all the way through and through, and then someone who's focused more on the reporting side, the strategy, who can really look at um, what is working and what's not working from a data analytics side. And that's one thing that, when you're on a campaign, you don't always have the time to be in the weeds on that. You're trying to get someone elected, having someone who's just pouring over data day to day, it's not always, the best use of time. But when you are working in these orgs where you have more time to set up a team, making sure that even if you have a small budget, one person who can really think through like content creative, someone who can really be more in strategy, making decisions based on data. And then from there, you can start branching into more roles underneath. So, as long as you're always going to have someone who can make strategy decisions based on the data you're seeing and one who can really focus on the creative and the content that's coming out, I think that that's more of the winning structure when it comes to social.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I also think we're, like, not, um we're behind on not building, like, platform teams. Like, we still
Yes.
call it just, like, social when actually, like, to your earlier point, LinkedIn is, like, a whole different world now, and, like,
Right?
LinkedIn is a very different place than TikTok, and somebody who can create really thoughtful content in one is not necessarily well equipped to create content for the other. And like when we get locked into these um, roles where like, oh, there's a digital director, and then maybe there's a content manager, or yeah, there's a bunch of different problems with like building a staff structure around digital as opposed to like the work, and the work of these
Right.
platforms is very different. Anyway, okay. Well, that's a hot take, which is a great segue into where I want to take us next, which is we're going to the hotline. We're going to the hot takes hotline.
Give us a call at the Hot Takes Hotline.
We've got a listener who's called in and shared their hot take, and I want to put a plug in. You too can call and share your hot takes. The number is 1-844-4 hot takes. Call us. You've got 60 seconds. You can call in anonymously and share your hot takes on what Democrats need to be doing better with media. So let's go to the hotline and hear what you guys had to say.
I really want to know why someone thought it was smart to stop registering young people to vote, and then they're surprised when young people don't want to vote for the Democrats. Like, I don't know what we're thinking. I, I know what we're thinking. We're thinking they're the problem when we're the problem. Democrats really need to get off their asses and really show people why they should register with our party and identify with us.
Thoughts? I mean, this connects to a lot of the
I
things we
know.
were just talking about, but yeah, thoughts on this?
Man, I think that's so huge. And man, thinking back to a local race I worked on in Atlanta, part of our district was on a college campus. And it was just wild how underutilized we think of these college campus. Like some of them have voting like centers on their campus. And, I think a lot of times there's so much you can do on a campaign. We think about just campaign motto of you have a short amount of time and short resources. So what's the best things you can do? And, campus organizing can be challenging if you don't start thinking of your plan from the beginning, but we do need to register more college students and also Generation A. Are we already at another generation? There is a full generation right now that is in high school that will be eligible to vote in the next presidential election. A lot of them will be eligible to vote by 2026. And how are we thinking of high schoolers along with the equation of college students or those that aren't even in college that are in that age group, maybe in secondary school or if it's, community colleges or a trade program. And I think this really goes back to that on the ground organizing, honestly, is like, why can't we get people in those communities to be the register to vote captains, even if it's just getting people online to talk about it more and, really get college students who are in that state. They may live somewhere else, but can they register to vote there? You can. You can
Yeah.
change your registration everywhere. I have voted in every state that I've lived in, and it's always a different state when it's election cycle.
Yep. Yep.
So I think honestly, just more messaging about you can register to vote. These are the dates. And we have to, as a party, start thinking of, youth that's more than just Gen Z on TikTok. Like these are on the ground students who have very engaged populations. Like I started thinking about politics when I was in college,
Yeah.
and so we have to really tackle that problem. But
Yeah, and
it's real.
when I was my first job was an organizer, and when I was trained as an organizer, we were taught that, like, there were different, like, almost like I'm not gonna use the right lingo, but, like, there were different phases of an organizing program, and there was always,
Yeah.
like, a dedicated voter registration phase, like, you had to look at the electorate, and if you didn't have a path to victory with the electorate as it exists, then your job was to change that electorate, and one of the best
Right.
ways to get more voters is to register ones that are gonna be aligned with you, and it seems like one of these, like it used to be a best practice, it used to be, like, a core principle, but it's totally true that I don't hear much about that anymore. I don't hear most of the campaigns I'm even working with thinking about a voter registration strategy, and at the same time, voter contact work has scaled and is much larger than it ever used to be, but it's like only this we pull a list, we send people out, they knock doors or they're phone banking, and I think there's a real conversation to be had about how effective that work is in an era where people have Ring doorbells and don't wanna talk to strangers at the door,
Yeah.
where we all have cell phones and aren't answering random numbers. So, it's really interesting that, like, we scaled organizing to new heights, but somehow lost this piece, which is actually maybe and I shouldn't say lost, I'm sure there are still a lot of groups who are screaming from the rooftops and begging us to pay attention and invest in this, so shout out to those groups, but I think it's clearly something that needs a lot more time and attention. So shout out to this caller and this listener for bringing this up. It's a great topic, and to your point, Kiana, like, brings up really important questions about who we're prioritizing, how we're reaching out to folks, where we think of organizing work as like where organizing happens and college campuses being an important place for that. So thanks. Great
Right.
topic, great conversation. I want to wrap us up. I wanted to say thank you again for taking the time
Mm.
and sharing your story and for, being in the fight. Honestly, like you had a whole other track rolling out ahead of you and you made a change and jumped in the fight, and I'm really grateful to folks who do that, so thank you. I wanna say, we like to give folks a chance to plug, so if Kiana, if you want to, you're welcome to plug anything. We can direct folks to follow you, at couriernewsroom.com, where you can see Kiana's work in action. Anything else you wanna highlight? Folks can stay in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, follow me on LinkedIn, I told you that's my
LinkedIn!
favorite platform right now and definitely loving to grow those connections. So, I'm on LinkedIn, Kiana, Cayana. Can't even spell my own name. Mackey-Nance on LinkedIn. And then yes, Courier Newsroom. You can find it on all of socials, but then definitely we have our network newsrooms that you can also see online as well. But yes, definitely just follow us on those platforms. And I think really just so glad that we've been able to talk today and had this chance to just really talk about things that are in my mind that I don't get to always to
So I
share
said,
with
we've all
people.
been talking about this stuff in private. Let's just roll camera. Let's just get it out here. Let's go. Well, and thanks to everybody who's listening. You can follow along with us at on our Substack, novelmessaging.substack.com. We're on YouTube at Novel Messaging. And again, make sure if this conversation raised anything you want to talk about, call us. Tell us about it. 1-844-4-HOT-TAKES. So thanks for everybody for listening. We'll see you next time with more novel ideas.